Welcome to Bookfulness. This is episode 22. Last time, we explored the incredible evolutionary story of Homo sapiens. I mean, our long journey from our ape-like ancestors right up to, well, us today.
Yeah, it was quite the journey, and it feels like a fitting way to wrap things up, actually. In this final deep dive of the series, we're kind of pivoting. We're moving from the pure biological history into the, let's say, broader and often, pretty complicated implications of evolution for society, for science itself, and maybe most importantly for how we understand our own place in the world.
We've been deep in Evolution, 4th edition, by Douglas J. Futuma and Mark Kirkpatrick, and today, we're hitting chapter 22, Evolution and Society. And our mission feels ambitious. We want to connect this huge biological theory to, well, everything. Public health, farming.
Technology design, even.
Exactly. Conservation, the way we behave. It's a lot.
It really is the so what chapter, isn't it? And the book itself doesn't shy away from saying how big a deal this is. I mean, Francois Jacob, the great geneticist, he wrote that, sure, biology has lots of important ideas, but the theory of evolution is, and I quote, by far the most important.
That's a powerful statement. And then you've got the philosopher Daniel Dennett, who goes even further. He argues that natural selection might just be like the single best idea anyone has ever had. Why? Why put it on that kind of pedestal?
Well, think about it. Before Darwin, there was this massive gap, right, between the physical world, space-time, cause and effect, and the world of life, meaning purpose. It felt separate.
Right.
Evolution bridges that gap. It gives us a mechanism purely based on physical laws that explains the staggering complexity, the beauty, everything we see in life. It's not just another scientific theory. It's a fundamental shift in how we understand the universe.
Okay, so if it's that fundamental, that well supported, why is it still such a lightning rod in society? That seems to be the first big hurdle. Let's unpack how this science interacts and often clashes with the way things are today.
Yeah, we really have to start with the conflict, especially in places like the U.S. I mean, you have this overwhelming, just massive, redundant body of evidence. From paleontology, genomics, comparative studies, geology, every angle supports evolution.
Right.
And yet, it remains this point of intense public debate, controversy.
And the book points out, crucially, that this controversy isn't really scientific. You'd be hard-pressed to find credible scientists actually challenging the basic fact of evolution. The fight is social, it's political.
Exactly. And most of the activist efforts, they really focus on one thing, fighting the teaching of evolution in public schools.
Ah, okay. And just a quick note for everyone listening, we'll mention some figures as we go, like figure 22.1 on public acceptance. You can find a link to see all those figures in the description for this deep dive.
Good point. Yeah, so the typical demand you hear is for equal time, right? Present alternative viewpoints in science class. But this bumps up against constitutional issues, particularly in the states. The courts have consistently said you can't have state sponsorship of specific religious doctrines in public education.
So that leads to different strategies, doesn't it? We probably need to define these different anti-evolutionary stances clearly.
We do. First, you've got what you might call traditional creationism. This is explicitly religious. It relies on, say, literal interpretations of religious texts for how life began and diversified, often talks about biblical timelines.
But the courts ruled against teaching that in science class.
Correct. So proponents needed a new angle, and that's where intelligent design, or ID, comes in.
This one's a bit more camouflaged.
That's a good way to put it. ID proponents are usually careful. They tend to avoid mentioning a specific deity. Instead, they argue that certain biological systems show irreducible complexity.
Okay, what does that mean, irreducible complexity?
The argument goes like this. Take something like a bacterial flagellum. It's complex. If you remove just one part, the whole thing stops working. So they argue it couldn't possibly have evolved step by step through gradual changes.
Because each step wouldn't have worked on its own.
Exactly. Therefore, they conclude it must be explained by an intelligent designer, someone acting outside the known laws of nature.
But how did that hold up legally?
Well, the courts didn't really buy it. There was a major case back in 2005, Kitzmiller v. Dover. The ruling was pretty definitive. Intelligent design is not science. It was judged to be, essentially, a religious doctrine dressed up to try and get around the constitutional ban.
Right. So after that ruling, the strategy changed again.
Yeah, it shifted towards pushing for things like critical analysis of evolution or academic freedom bills. These sound reasonable on the surface, but often they're used to introduce doubt, not just about evolution, but increasingly about other settled science, like climate change.
This whole debate seems to hinge on misunderstanding some core scientific ideas, like the difference between a fact and a theory.
Oh, absolutely essential. This is maybe the biggest point of confusion.
Because in everyday chat, if I say, I have a theory about why the bus is late, I just mean a guess, right? An unsupported hunch.
Exactly. And opponents of evolution exploit that common usage all the time. It's just a theory.
But in science,
In science, a theory with a capital T maybe is completely different. It's not a guess. It's a huge, complex, incredibly well-supported explanation. It's a framework that ties together tons of individual hypotheses and facts into a coherent understanding of how something works.
like the theory of gravity or plate tectonics.
Precisely. The theory of evolution is that overarching framework. It includes natural selection, genetic drift, speciation, coevolution, all the mechanisms and patterns we've been talking about in this series. It explains how life changes.
Okay, so that's the theory, the framework. Where does the fact part come in? Is evolution a fact or theory?
It's both. Think of it like this. A scientific fact is basically a hypothesis that's been tested so many times, supported by so much consistent evidence from so many different angles, that we can confidently treat it as true. It's proven beyond any reasonable doubt.
And the core claim of evolution?
The core claim that all living species descended, with modification from common ancestors over vast periods of time, that is the fact of evolution. It's supported by mountains of evidence.
It's the historical reality of life. It's withstood over 150 years of intense scientific scrutiny. The theory part is the explanation for how that fact came about, the mechanisms.
Exactly. Natural selection, drift, mutation, constraints. That's the theory explaining the fact.
Okay, now let's tackle those common arguments you hear against evolution head on. The book has a great section, box 22A, that rebuts them. Let's go through a few.
Good idea. These are important.
Argument 1. Evolution cannot be observed or proved. You hear that a lot.
Right. And the rebuttal is pretty straightforward. First off, evolutionary changes have been observed directly, both in the lab and out in the wild. We see bacteria evolving antibiotic resistance in hospitals, sometimes in a matter of days or weeks. We see insects evolving resistance to pesticides. We see fish adapting to polluted waters. It happens.
So it is observable. What about the proof part?
Well, proof in science isn't quite like mathematical proof. Science works by testing hypotheses and predictions against evidence. When a hypothesis survives test after test and is supported by vast amounts of data from independent lines of inquiry, we gain extremely high confidence in it. That's what we mean by proven beyond reasonable doubt. Evolution certainly meets that standard.
Okay, argument 2. Evolution is untestable. No possible observation could ever refute it. This one really misunderstands how science works, doesn't it?
It fundamentally misunderstands falsifiability, yes. Evolution is actually incredibly testable. It makes very specific predictions about the patterns we should find in nature.
Like what? Give us an example of something that could disprove it.
Okay, think about the fossil record. Evolution predicts a specific chronological order. Simple life forms before complex ones, fish before amphibians, amphibians before reptiles and mammals, and so on. If someone were to find, say, a fossil rabbit,
A modern mammal.
incontrovertibly embedded in Precambrian rocks that are, 600 million years old, long before any mammals should exist, that would be a massive problem. The whole theory would likely collapse overnight. Its core predictions are constantly being tested every time a fossil is dug up, and so far, they hold.
That's a great example. So evolution is falsifiable. What about creationism or ID? Can they be falsified?
That's the key difference. They really can't. If we find a biological feature that seems poorly designed or inefficient, or if there's a gap in the fossil record, proponents of ID can just say, well, that's the mysterious plan of the designer, or the designer chose to do it that way for reasons we can't fathom.
So any observation can be made to fit the idea of a supernatural designer.
Pretty much. Since a supernatural intelligence is assumed to have unlimited power and inscrutable motives, it can theoretically explain anything: perfect design, imperfect design, bizarre structures, missing links. But if your explanation can account for literally any possible outcome, it doesn't actually explain anything specific. It's untestable. It's not science.
Okay, the third big one, and maybe the one that feels most intuitive to people, the argument from design. Things look complex, they look designed, so they must have been designed.
Yes, the watchmaker argument, essentially. And the rebuttal here gets to the heart of how evolution actually works. Complex structures don't just pop into existence fully formed. That would be hard to explain gradually.
Right, that's the irreducible complexity claim again.
Exactly. But evolution doesn't work that way. Complex traits evolve step by step through the accumulation of many small, simple changes over long periods. And crucially, it often involves co-opting existing parts for new functions.
This idea of pre-adaptation, right? Taking something that evolved for one purpose and modifying it for another.
Precisely. Think about feathers. They likely first evolved for insulation or display in dinosaurs. Only later were they co-opted and modified for flight. It's a messy tinkering process. It's historical modification, building on what's already there. It's not like an engineer designing from a clean blueprint.
And that very messiness, the imperfections, that actually becomes a powerful argument against perfect design, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It leads us perfectly into the next section, the evidence for evolution and why the apparent design is often anything but perfect.
Okay, so before we dive into the imperfections, maybe let's just quickly recap the sheer weight of positive evidence for evolution that we've touched on throughout this series. It's important context.
It's critical because the case isn't built on just one thing. The textbook lays out these pillars of evidence really clearly. First, obviously the fossil record.
Yeah, the history book written in rock.
Exactly. It's this undeniable library showing life changing over time. It documents those crucial transitional stages, the shift from fish fins to tetrapod limbs, or from feathered dinosaurs to birds. And just as importantly, it confirms that chronological order we talked about. Prokaryotes always show up before eukaryotes, fish before land vertebrates, no rabbits in the Precambrian.
Okay, pillar one, fossils. What's next?
Phylogenetic and comparative studies. This is looking at living organisms. We see shared traits, anatomical structures, developmental processes, molecular sequences across incredibly different species. Why? Because they inherited them from a common ancestor.
The classic example being the forelimbs of vertebrates. A human arm, a bat wing, a whale flipper. Same underlying bone structure, modified for different functions.
Exactly. Homology. And at the molecular level, it's even more profound. The fact that virtually all life uses the same genetic code, that's incredibly strong evidence for a single origin.
And those developmental toolkit genes, like the Hox genes that map out body plans.
Yeah, finding basically the same set of master control genes building the body of a fruit fly, a mouse, and a human. I mean, these lineages diverged over 500 million years ago. That points directly back to a shared ancestor who already had that basic toolkit.
Okay, fossils, comparative studies. Pillar 3.
Genomics. This is the modern powerhouse, reading the history directly from the DNA sequences themselves. Molecular phylogenies, family trees built from gene sequences, overwhelmingly confirm the relationships we already suspected from morphology and fossils, and they reveal deep history embedded right in our own genomes.
The book mentions an interesting example here. Incomplete lineage sorting with MHC genes. Can you unpack that? It sounds complicated.
It is a bit technical, but the concept is fascinating. MHC genes are crucial for the immune system. They're incredibly diverse, lots of different alleles in the population.
Right, helps us fight off different pathogens.
Exactly. Now, incomplete lineage sorting means that sometimes when two species split from a common ancestor, some of the genetic variation that existed in the ancestor gets passed down unevenly to both descendant species.
So, some versions of a gene might stick around in both new species.
Precisely. And studies have found that certain human MHC alleles are actually more closely related genetically to some chimpanzee MHC alleles than they are to other human alleles.
Whoa! So my immune gene might be a closer cousin to a chimp's gene than to my neighbor's.
In some specific cases, yes. What does that tell us? It tells us that specific genetic variation, those particular alleles, existed in the common ancestor population before humans and chimps diverged millions of years ago. That ancient variation was just carried along into both lineages.
That's like finding identical, very specific old family photos in the attics of two distant cousins. It proves they share that specific bit of history.
That's a great analogy. It's direct evidence of shared ancestry written in our DNA.
Okay, and the final pillar.
Biogeography. The study of where species live on Earth. The patterns only make sense in light of evolution and geological history. Why are marsupials the dominant native mammals in Australia, but placentals dominate elsewhere?
Because Australia drifted away before the placental mammals really diversified and spread.
Exactly. It's historical contingency. It wasn't some designer saying, I'll put marsupials here. It's the result of evolution playing out on a changing map.
So you pile all that up, fossils, comparisons, genomics, biogeography. The scientific case is just immense.
It's overwhelming. Which brings us back to that persistent gut feeling some people have. But it looks designed.
Right, the failure of the argument from design. And William Paley's watchmaker analogy from the 1800s is still the go-to example. If you find a complex watch, you infer a watchmaker. Nature is complex, therefore.
Therefore, a designer. The source points out, yeah, this is still probably the most common reason people give for believing in a creator, but evolution offers a powerful counter. Nature isn't like a perfectly designed watch. It's full of compromises, kludges, inefficiencies, and leftovers from its history.
This is where the vestigial imperfection comes in. Let's use that human appendix example.
Perfect example. If an intelligent engineer designed us from scratch, why include this little organ pouch that seems to do very little except get infected and potentially kill us? Appendicitis is a serious medical emergency.
Doesn't seem like great design.
Not if you're aiming for perfection, but the evolutionary explanation makes perfect sense. It's likely a vestigial structure, a leftover bit from an ancestor, probably one with a more plant-heavy diet, where a larger version of that structure, a cecum, played a significant role in digestion.
So as our diet changed, it shrank, but it didn't disappear entirely. Maybe the selection pressure to eliminate it completely wasn't strong enough.
Exactly. It just hangs around, a reminder of our evolutionary past. It highlights contingency. We are the way we are because of the specific path our ancestors took. An intelligent designer, presumably, wouldn't leave potentially lethal leftovers in the design.
And this idea of imperfection, even outright cruelty in nature, was something Darwin himself really grappled with, wasn't it? He wrote about the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel works of nature.
He did. That famous line, often attributed to him, "What a book a devil's chaplain might write." It captures that disturbing realization.
If you believe in a perfect, benevolent designer, how do you square that with some of the horrors we see in the natural world? The book mentions examples.
Yeah, like maggots burrowing into the brains of living sheep,
Hmm?
or certain parasitic wasps whose larvae slowly eat a caterpillar from the inside out, keeping it alive until they burst out.
It's gruesome.
It is. And it's hard to reconcile with the idea of a kind, omnipotent designer. But from an evolutionary perspective, it's straightforward. Selection favors whatever traits maximize an organism's reproductive success, even if those traits involve inflicting terrible suffering on another organism. Efficiency and niceness aren't the primary drivers. Differential reproduction is.
So that contrast, the perfection implied by design versus the often brutal, inefficient, imperfect reality documented by evolution, that's a really powerful philosophical counter to the simple watchmaker idea.
I think it's one of the most compelling, yeah. Nature is amazing, but it's definitely not perfect engineering.
It's crucial, I think, to shift gears slightly and really emphasize something. Evolution isn't just ancient history. It's not just fossils and dinosaurs.
Absolutely not. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. Evolution is happening right now. It's a continuously active process. And often, human activities are actually accelerating it.
And the most stark, urgent example of that has to be in medicine, with antibiotic resistance.
Without a doubt. The book calls the rise of multi-drug resistant pathogens a catastrophic threat, and that's not hyperbole. This is natural selection playing out in fast forward right in our hospitals and communities.
How does it work so fast?
Well, we apply intense selection pressure. Every time we use an antibiotic, we kill off the susceptible bacteria, but any bacteria that happen to have a mutation conferring resistance survive and multiply. We're essentially selecting for the resistant strains.
And the stakes are incredibly high now, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about last resort drugs failing.
We are. The source mentions bacteria like Klebsiella pneumonia developing resistance to carbapenems. These were the drugs we turned to when nothing else worked. Now, for some infections, we're essentially back in the pre-antibiotic era. No effective treatment.
And bacteria have ways to speed this up even more, don't they? It's not just parent-to-offspring inheritance.
Right. They use horizontal gene transfer. They can literally swap genes, including resistance genes, between different individual bacteria, sometimes even across different species. It's like they're trading cheat codes for survival.
Wow. So understanding the evolutionary dynamics here isn't just academic.
It's critical for survival.
Yeah.
Developing strategies to manage resistance, to use antibiotics more wisely, to develop new treatments, it all requires thinking evolutionarily.
Okay, so beyond this urgent medical crisis, are the principles of evolution useful elsewhere, outside of biology?
Surprisingly, yes. That core concept, you have variation, you have selection based on some criteria, and you have inheritance or propagation of the successful variants. It's a really powerful and flexible problem-solving algorithm.
people apply it to things like language change or how cultures evolve.
Yeah, or even how scientific ideas themselves gain traction. But maybe the most practical non-biological application is in evolutionary computation.
Okay, what's that? Using evolution
Yeah.
in computers.
Essentially, yes,
Ah,
use genetic algorithms. These are computer programs that mimic natural selection to solve really complex problems, often ones that are just too hard for humans to figure out through traditional programming or design.
how does a genetic algorithm work? Are you simulating millions of years?
Sort of, but massively sped up. You start with a population of potential solutions to your problem. These are like your initial organisms. They could be designs for an antenna or parameters for a financial model, anything.
Okay.
Then you introduce random mutations into these solutions, and you define a fitness function, a way to measure how well each solution performs according to your goal.
So you test them all out.
Right. The ones that perform best are selected. They get to reproduce, meaning that their successful features are combined and carried over into the next generation of solutions, maybe with more random tweaks. You repeat this process over and over.
So you're iterating, mutating, selecting, guiding the computer towards better and better solutions without explicitly telling it how to get there.
Exactly. You're letting simulated evolution find optimized solutions that a human designer might never have thought of. The book mentions robots using these algorithms to adapt on the fly to unexpected damage or changes in their environment. They learn to walk differently if a leg gets broken, for instance.
That's amazing, using the logic of life to make better technology.
And speaking of better technology, sometimes the best solution is already out there. Nature's been running R&D for about 3.5 billion years. This leads to biomimetics.
Copying nature's designs, basically.
Yep, learning from nature's adaptations. The book gives some great concrete examples.
Like Velcro. That wasn't just invented out of thin air, was it?
Nope. The inventor, George de Mestral, got the idea after noticing how stubbornly plant burrs stuck to his dog's fur and his clothes after a walk. He looked at them under a microscope and saw tiny hooks. Evolution's design for seed dispersal inspired a fastener.
Simple but brilliant. What else?
Think about adhesion. How do geckos walk up walls? Engineers are studying the incredible microstructure of gecko feet, millions of tiny hairs called setae, that use van der Waals forces to create powerful, reusable, dry adhesives. No glue, just physics, optimized by evolution.
And sticking things underwater. That's a tough engineering problem.
It is. So researchers are studying muscle byssal threads, those super strong, flexible fibers muscles use to cling to rocks in crashing waves. They're figuring out the complex chemistry to develop new waterproof glues for medical or marine applications. Nature already solved it.
It's like a giant library of solutions just waiting to be read.
It really is. And sometimes we don't just copy the design, we borrow the actual tools that evolution produced. Our whole biotech toolkit is filled with them.
You mean like enzymes or processes that evolved in other organisms?
Exactly. The prime example has to be PCR, the polymerase chain reaction. It's the foundation of so much modern biology, amplifying tiny amounts of DNA.
And the Q ingredient.
The heat-stable enzyme, Taq polymerase. Where did we get it? From a bacterium, Thermus aquaticus, that evolved to thrive in the boiling hot springs of Yellowstone. Its enzymes had to be stable at high temperatures, a perfect adaptation for its environment, and exactly what we needed for the heating and cooling cycles of PCR.
We just borrowed its evolutionary solution.
We did. Same story with the revolutionary gene editing tool, CRISPR-Cas9. That complex molecular machinery wasn't invented in a lab. It evolved in bacteria as their defense system against viruses. It's like their adaptive immune system.
They use it to recognize and cut up viral DNA.
Precisely. And scientists figured out how to reprogram that ancient bacterial defense mechanism to edit genes in basically any organism, including humans. It's arguably one of the biggest biotech breakthroughs ever, and it came straight from microbial evolution.
And we're even finding new medicines this way, like antibiotics.
Absolutely. With resistance rising, we're desperately searching for new compounds. The book mentions a bacterium found living in the human nose, Staphylococcus lugdunensis. It produces a novel antibiotic to outcompete other bacteria, like dangerous MRSA strains living in the same place.
So the nose bacteria evolved its own weapon in its local turf war.
And that weapon turns out to be effective against pathogens that threaten us. We're finding potential cures by studying results of billions of years of evolutionary arms races happening all around us, even inside us.
Okay, let's broaden the view now to how we manage the planet's resources. It seems pretty clear that understanding evolution is not just helpful, it's probably essential. especially when it comes to feeding ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Start with agriculture. Think about it. Every crop we grow, every farm animal we raise, their high yields, their specific traits, that's all the result of artificial selection. It is evolution, just directed by humans over generations.
We've been evolutionary engineers for millennia, without necessarily calling it that.
Exactly. But that success has a potential downside, particularly when we focus too much on uniformity. The book warns about the cost of uniformity.
You mean planting huge fields with just one single genetic type of crop, monocultures?
Precisely. When you do that, you create this incredibly vulnerable target. If a new disease pops up or a pest evolves a way to attack that specific strain,
It can wipe out the entire field. If one plant is susceptible, they all are.
the classic cautionary tale is the U.S. cornleaf blight epidemic back in 1970. A huge percentage of the corn being grown carried the same specific genetic trait that made it highly productive, but also, unfortunately, highly susceptible to a new fungal blight. The losses were devastating.
So diversity is like insurance.
It really is. Genetic diversity within a crop population provides resilience. The book mentions studies with rice, showing that fields planted with a mixture of different rice genotypes suffer significantly less disease damage than the fields with just one genotype. The disease just can't spread as easily.
And it's not just about avoiding disaster with diseases. Agriculture is in this constant evolutionary arms race with pests, isn't it? Managing resistance.
It's a massive ongoing challenge. Insects evolve resistance to insecticides, weeds evolve resistance to herbicides. It happens incredibly fast because we apply such strong selection pressure with these chemicals.
And the cost is huge, right? Farmers have to use more chemicals or switch to newer, often more expensive ones.
Billions of dollars globally, easily. But this is where evolutionary theory can really help proactively. Biologists use evolutionary principles to design smarter strategies for deploying pesticides.
Like rotating different chemicals,
Right.
or leaving untreated refuge areas.
Exactly. The goal is to manage the pest population in a way that slows down the evolution of resistance. You want to keep susceptible genes around in the pest population so the resistance genes don't just sweep to fixation immediately. It extends the useful lifespan of the chemicals we have.
Okay, and what about using nature against nature? Biological control. Introducing predators or parasites to control pests. Does evolution play a role there?
A central role. Let's say a new invasive insect pest arrives in a region. The first step is often to figure out exactly where it came from. And for that, you use phylogenetic systematics, building its evolutionary family tree to pinpoint its precise native range and its closest relatives.
Why is knowing its exact origin story so important?
Because that tells you where to look for its natural enemies. You want to find predators or parasites back in its homeland that have co-evolved specifically to attack that pest species, or its very close relatives.
You don't want to introduce something that's going to start attacking native insects or crops.
Precisely. You need specialists. Evolutionary history guides you to find those highly targeted, co-evolved biological control agents. It makes the whole process much more effective and ecologically safer.
Okay, so evolution helps manage resources. But now we have to turn to a much bleaker topic, the current extinction crisis. The language in the book here is stark.
It is, and appropriately so. The scientific consensus is pretty clear. Human activities have triggered a major mass extinction event. The rate of species loss happening now is estimated to be comparable to, or potentially even faster than, the rates during the great mass extinctions of the geological past.
Like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, or the even bigger one at the end of the Permian period.
Exactly. The end Permian wiped out something like 90% of marine species. We could be heading towards losses on that kind of scale if things don't change drastically.
What are the main things driving this loss right now?
The biggest driver, overwhelmingly, is habitat destruction. Cutting down forests, converting land for agriculture, urbanization, resource extraction. We're simply eliminating the places where species can live, especially in tropical rainforests, which hold a huge fraction of Earth's biodiversity.
The book gives some scary numbers, like 10 to 25% of rainforest species potentially lost in just the next 30 years.
Yeah, the projections are grim. And layered on top of habitat loss is the accelerating threat of global warming. Climate change is happening so fast.
That species just can't keep up.
That's the problem of the adaptation lag. For species to adapt genetically to the rate at which climates are shifting, their climate niches, the range of temperature and rainfall they need would have to evolve incredibly fast. The book estimates something like 10,000 times faster than typical rates of niche evolution seen in the fossil record.
10,000
Yeah.
times faster, that number just stops you cold. It seems biologically impossible for most species.
For many, it likely is. And even if they could theoretically evolve that fast, can they physically move? Often, their paths are blocked by human landscapes, cities, farms, highways. They're trapped.
So the forecasts, they're not good.
No. The book cites computer simulations predicting that somewhere between 18 and 35% of species assessed could become committed to extinction within the next 50 years.
Committed to extinction. What does that mean exactly?
It's a chilling term. It means that even if we stopped all harmful activities today, their populations are already too small, too fragmented, or their environment has changed too much for them to recover. They're effectively doomed, even if they linger for a while. The extinction process is already locked in.
Wow. Okay. So in the face of this overwhelming crisis, how can evolutionary biology actually help? What's the guidance for conservation?
It provides critical tools and perspectives. First, using phylogenetics, understanding the evolutionary tree of life, helps prioritize conservation efforts. We don't just want to save the largest number of species, we want to preserve the maximum amount of unique evolutionary history.
So focusing on species that represent ancient, distinct branches of the tree.
Exactly, protecting evolutionary distinctiveness. Second, population genetics is crucial for managing small, endangered populations to avoid inbreeding depression.
Right. When populations get too small, harmful mutations can build up and they lose the genetic variation they need to adapt.
Precisely. Evolutionary genetics helps monitor the health of these populations and informs strategies like captive breeding or moving individuals between isolated groups, translocation, to maintain genetic diversity and viability.
And third, can it help predict how species will cope with climate change?
To some extent, yes. By studying a species' existing genetic variation for traits like heat tolerance and looking at its past evolutionary responses to climate shifts, if we have fossil or genetic data, we can get some idea of its potential to adapt. It helps identify which species are most vulnerable and where intervention might be most needed.
All right, let's pivot now to focus directly on human health. This is a relatively new but rapidly growing field, evolutionary medicine. It uses the principles of evolution to understand why we get sick, not just how.
And a big part of that seems to be this idea of mismatch, right? Our evolutionary hangover. Our bodies are basically Stone Age physiology living in a space-age world. That's a great way to put it. We evolved under very different conditions, and many modern diseases arise because our bodies aren't well adapted to our current lifestyles, diets, and environments.
Let's start with something fundamental: aging or senescence. Why do our bodies inevitably break down? Evolution offers an explanation beyond just wear and tear.
It does. One key concept is antagonistic pleiotropy. It sounds technical, but the idea is powerful.
Okay, break it down. Antagonistic pleiotropy.
Pleiotropy just means a single gene can affect multiple different traits. Antagonistic means those effects can be opposing, specifically across different life stages. So a gene might give you an advantage early in life, helping you survive and reproduce successfully.
Which natural selection would strongly favor.
But that same gene might have negative consequences later in life after your main reproductive years are over. Selection is weaker on traits that manifest late in life.
So genes that help us thrive and reproduce when young might contribute to our decline when old.
That seems to be part of the story for many age-related diseases. The book mentions genes like BRCA1 and BRCA2. Mutations in these increase the risk of breast and ovarian cancer later in life. But perhaps those same gene variants conferred some reproductive advantage earlier, maybe related to fertility or tissue repair when younger.
And the APOE4 gene linked to Alzheimer's.
Same idea. It's strongly associated with late-onset Alzheimer's, but some research suggests it might have benefits earlier in life, perhaps related to cholesterol transport, immune response, or even cognitive development in children in certain environments. Selection favored the early benefit. The late life cost is an evolutionary side effect.
That's a really different way of thinking about aging. Not as a failure, but as a trade-off.
Exactly. And this mismatch idea extends dramatically to what are called the diseases of civilization. These are conditions rare in hunter-gatherer societies, but rampant today.
Like obesity and type 2 diabetes.
The prime examples. Our bodies evolved in environments where calories were often scarce and required a lot of effort to obtain. We developed appetites that drive us to seek out fat and sugar, and metabolisms designed to store energy efficiently whenever we got the chance.
Good survival strategy back then.
Essential. But now, we live surrounded by cheap, abundant, easily accessible, high-calorie processed foods. Our ancient appetite says eat. Our ancient metabolism says store, and the result is an epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Our physiology is mismatched to our food environment.
The book mentions high fructose corn syrup and lack of exercise as key drivers.
Absolutely. Our bodies just weren't designed to handle that constant flood of sugar with minimal physical activity.
And it's not just diet, right? Our activity levels are mismatched too, like with osteoporosis.
Yeah, our skeletons evolved to expect regular physical stress from walking, running, carrying things. That stress signals the bones to maintain density. Our modern, much more sedentary lifestyles mean our bones don't get those signals as strongly, contributing to bone thinning later in life.
Okay, another big mismatch area mentioned is the hygiene hypothesis. This one seems almost paradoxical. Being too clean makes us sick.
It does seem weird at first, doesn't it? But the idea is that our immune systems evolved expecting constant exposure to a wide variety of microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites right from birth. This early exposure helps train the immune system
Train it to do what?
to learn the crucial difference between genuinely dangerous pathogens, harmless environmental microbes, and the body's own tissues.
Yeah.
Without this diverse microbial training early on,
Because we live in much more sterile environments, use lots of antibacterial soaps, take antibiotics.
the immune system might not develop properly. It can become overreactive, misidentifying harmless things like pollen, dust mites, certain foods, or even the body's own cells as threats. This is thought to be a major factor behind the huge rise in allergies, asthma, and autoimmune diseases like Crohn's disease or type 1 diabetes in developed countries.
So our quest for hygiene might be disrupting a vital evolutionary relationship with our microbes.
It seems likely, and that connects directly to the microbiome. We're increasingly realizing we're not just individuals, we're ecosystems, hosting trillions of bacteria, especially in our gut, that are essential for health.
And antibiotics, while life-saving, can wreak havoc on that internal ecosystem.
They're like carpet bombing. They kill the bad guys, but also wipe out lots of the good guys, the beneficial bacteria that help us digest food, produce vitamins, and even regulate our immune system.
Which can lead to problems like difficile infections taking over after antibiotic treatment.
Exactly. C. diff is often resistant and can flourish when its competitors are wiped out. The book even mentions fecal therapy, transplanting gut microbes from a healthy donor as a powerful, evolutionarily informed way to restore balance after antibiotic disruption. It acknowledges we need that evolved microbial community.
Okay, shifting from external factors to internal processes. Evolution offers a really different perspective on cancer, too.
Fundamentally different, cancer is an evolutionary process. It's happening inside the body at the level of cells.
How is cancer evolution?
Think about it. A tumor starts with mutations in a single cell's DNA, somatic mutations. Some of these mutations might allow that cell to divide faster, or ignore signals telling it to stop growing, or evade programmed cell death.
So that cell has a reproductive advantage over its neighbors.
Exactly. It starts a lineage, a clone of cells. As these cells divide, more mutations occur. Some might allow the cells to attract their own blood supply, or invade nearby tissues, or resist treatments. It's natural selection acting on cell lineages within the body. The fittest cells, the ones best at surviving and proliferating in the body's environment, win out.
That's a grim perspective, but it makes sense. Does this evolutionary view change how we treat cancer?
It's starting to. It's led to new ideas like adaptive therapy.
Okay, what's that? How is it different from standard treatment?
Standard chemotherapy often uses the maximum tolerated dose, hit the cancer as hard as possible to kill as many cells as possible. But evolution tells us this creates the strongest possible selection pressure for resistance. You wipe out all the drug-sensitive cells, leaving only the toughest, most resistant clones to regrow.
Right, you select for the supervillains.
Precisely. Adaptive therapy takes a different approach based on ecological and evolutionary principles. It often uses lower or intermittent doses of drugs. The goal isn't necessarily to eradicate the tumor immediately, but to control it.
How does that work?
By leaving some drug-sensitive cancer cells alive, you allow them to compete with the more dangerous resistant cells. The sensitive cells can actually help keep the resistant population in check, slowing down the overall growth and evolution of the tumor. It's about managing the cancer ecosystem rather than trying to sterilize it, which often just breeds stronger resistance. It's still experimental for many cancers, but it's a promising evolution-informed strategy.
Fascinating. And finally, in this section, tracking pathogens. Evolution's key here too, right?
Absolutely central. We use phylogenetic methods, building evolutionary trees all the time to track infectious disease outbreaks.
By comparing the genetic sequences of the virus or bacteria from different patients?
Exactly. As a pathogen spreads, it mutates. By comparing the mutations in samples from different people, we can reconstruct the transmission pathways. We can figure out where an outbreak started, how it's spreading, and whether new, potentially more dangerous variants are emerging.
The book mentions using this during the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone.
Yes, phylogenetics helped confirm that the outbreak likely started from a single spillover event from an animal reservoir and then spread human to human. Tracking the mutations allowed researchers to map out transmission chains, helping public health officials target their containment efforts much more effectively. It's a standard, powerful tool now for epidemiology, completely reliant on understanding evolutionary principles.
All right, this brings us to perhaps the most complex and definitely the most controversial area, applying evolutionary thinking to human behavior. We absolutely have to start with a big, flashing caution sign here, given the history.
Yes, absolutely crucial. You can't talk about biology and human behavior without acknowledging how these ideas have been terribly misused in the past. There's a lot of sensitivity around anything that sounds like biological determinism, and for very good reasons.
We have to mention social Darwinism. This wasn't Darwin's idea, right? It was more Herbert Spencer.
Primarily Spencer, yeah. He took concepts like survival of the fittest, a phrase he actually coined, and wrongly applied them directly to human societies and economies.
Arguing that things like poverty or social hierarchies were just the natural result of biological competition, that some people or groups were inherently less fit.
Exactly. It was a distorted interpretation used to justify social inequality, imperialism, racism, basically arguing against any kind of social support or reform because it would interfere with this supposed natural struggle.
And this later fed into the horrors of the eugenics movement.
It did. Eugenics took the next step, actively advocating for policies like forced sterilization or discriminatory immigration laws to supposedly improve the human gene pool by preventing supposedly inferior people from reproducing. It's vital to be crystal clear. These were political ideologies built on a gross perversion and misuse of science.
So the core message here has to be,
Science describes what is or how things work. It tries to explain the natural world based on evidence. It does not dictate what ought to be. It cannot tell us what is morally right or wrong or how society should be structured.
that leap from is to ought, that's the naturalistic fallacy, right? Assuming that because something is natural, it must therefore be good.
Precisely, a dangerous and flawed assumption. So with that massive historical caution firmly in place, how does modern science approach the complexity of human behavior from an evolutionary perspective?
We're definitely not blank slates, are we? But we're not just puppets of our genes either.
Exactly. The modern view is that behavior is this incredibly intricate interplay between our evolved genetic heritage and the powerful, flexible influence of culture and learning.
One field that explores this is evolutionary psychology. What's its main focus?
Evolutionary psychology tries to identify potential psychological adaptations, mental modules, or tendencies that might have evolved because they helped our ancestors solve specific recurring problems in the environments they lived in, particularly during the Pleistocene.
What kind of problems?
Things like finding food, choosing mates, cooperating with others, avoiding predators, raising children, the fundamental challenges of survival and reproduction.
The book gives an example about detecting cheaters in social exchanges.
Right. The idea is that cooperation and reciprocity were vital for survival in small ancestral groups. But cooperation is vulnerable to cheaters, individuals who take the benefits without paying the costs. So evolutionary psychologists hypothesize that we might have evolved specialized cognitive mechanisms to be good at detecting cheaters.
And they tested this.
Using logic problems, they found people are generally not great at abstract logic puzzles. But if you frame the exact same logical structure as a social contract, like if you borrow the car, you have to fill the gas tank, and ask people to spot who might be violating the rule, performance shoots way up.
Suggesting our brains are specifically tuned for that kind of social reasoning.
That's the interpretation. Another line of evidence comes from looking for universal patterns across cultures. The book mentions a big study on mate preferences across 37 different cultures.
What did they find? Were there consistent patterns despite the huge cultural differences?
There were. Consistent with evolutionary predictions based on differential parental investment, women across cultures tended to place a higher value on potential mates' resources, status, and indicators of commitment. Men, conversely, tended to place a higher value on youth and physical attractiveness, which are cues to fertility.
And the fact that these general trends popped up in so many diverse societies.
Suggests it's not just something learned independently in each culture. It points towards an underlying, evolved psychological predisposition interacting with local cultural norms.
But clearly, culture is hugely powerful too. We're not just acting out ancient scripts. This brings in gene culture coevolution.
Right. This framework acknowledges that culture itself evolves. Cultural traits, ideas, beliefs, technologies, fashions, sometimes called memes, spread and change over time, but they evolve differently than genes.
How so?
The biggest difference is horizontal transmission. Genes mostly pass vertically from parent to child, but cultural traits can spread sideways from peers, teachers, media, leaders very rapidly within a single generation, even between unrelated people.
Think how quickly language changes, or a new technology spreads, or a social norm shifts. That's way faster than genetic evolution.
Much, much faster. And another crucial point. Cultural traits can spread even if they actually reduce the biological fitness, survival, and reproduction of the individuals who adopt them.
How can that happen? Wouldn't natural selection weed them out?
Not necessarily if the cultural trait provides other rewards. The book uses tobacco or excessive alcohol use as examples. These clearly harm health and reduce lifespan negative biological fitness consequences, yet they spread widely. Why?
Maybe because they offer immediate psychological rewards, or social status, or help with group bonding?
Exactly. They have advantages in the realm of cultural transmission. They are appealing or easily imitated, even if they are detrimental biologically. Culture has its own evolutionary dynamic, interacting with, but not completely constrained by, genetic fitness.
Okay, let's look at a specific complex case study the book uses to illustrate studying behavior: sexual orientation.
Right. This presents a well-known evolutionary puzzle, particularly regarding male homosexuality. If there's a significant genetic influence on sexual orientation, and twin and family studies suggest there is, and if gay men, on average, have fewer biological children than heterosexual men,
Then why haven't the genes associated with homosexuality been eliminated by natural selection over time? It seems like they should decrease in frequency.
that's the puzzle. Its persistence suggests there might be some counterbalancing evolutionary mechanism at play. One leading hypothesis, which fits some of the genetic data, is sexually antagonistic selection.
Okay, we heard antagonistic pleiotropy for aging. How does sexually antagonistic selection work?
It means that a gene variant might have opposite effects on the fitness of males versus females. So, genes that might increase the likelihood of homosexuality in men could simultaneously provide a reproductive advantage when inherited by their female relatives.
So the same genes do different things depending on whether you're male or female.
Potentially, yes. The book cites research, particularly studies from Italy, that found something intriguing. The female relatives on the maternal side of gay men, their mothers and maternal aunts, tended to have significantly more children, on average, than the female relatives of heterosexual men.
Wow, so higher fecundity, more reproductive success in the female carriers of these potential gene variants.
Exactly. The idea is that the reproductive boost in the females could be enough to offset the reduced reproduction in the males carrying the same genes, thus maintaining those genes in the population over generations. It's a complex balancing act.
It really highlights that evolution acts on genes and their complex effects across different contexts, not just on individuals in isolation.
It does, and the book concludes this section by emphasizing that while understanding our evolved psychology provides important insights into our tendencies and predispositions,
It doesn't lock us in.
not at all. Our immense behavioral flexibility, driven largely by culture and learning, allows for a vast range of human expression and potential that goes far beyond the more rigid, instinct-driven behaviors we see in many other animals.
So what's the ultimate payoff of all this evolutionary knowledge, especially regarding ourselves?
The book suggests its profound self-understanding, recognizing our deep 3.5 billion year history on this planet, seeing our connection to all other life, and appreciating how science, with its demand for evidence and rigorous honesty, gives us the most reliable way to understand the natural world and our own complex place within it. Hashtag outro.
So today we really brought it all home, wrapping up our deep dive by looking at the massive implications of evolution for Well, pretty much everything in modern life and society. We saw it's not just history, it's an active force.
Yeah, we touched on how evolution is a powerful, factual theory with consequences across the board.
Yeah.
We talked about how understanding it is guiding science from battling antibiotic resistance and inspiring new tech through biomimetics
Got it.
to shaping conservation strategies in the face of the extinction crisis and even developing smarter evolution-informed approaches in medicine, like cancer therapy.
And we finished by tackling the really sensitive area of human behavior, acknowledging the past misuses, but also seeing how modern science views our actions as this complex blend of ancient genetic legacies and the super fast evolution of culture, which is really what makes us so adaptable.
And well, with that discussion, we've actually reached the end of our journey through evolution, fourth edition by Douglas J. Futuma and Mark Kirkpatrick. It's been quite the exploration, hasn't it? From Darwin's basic insights all the way to the frontiers of genomics, human origins, and these big societal challenges.
It really has. Thank you so much for joining us for this entire series on Bookfulness. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did. Join us next time when we'll crack open a brand new book.